Hello, I'm Leonard Rothman. I'm a map collector. I've been collecting antique maps for the last 40 years with the help of my wife, Juliet. Um, I collected many, many different types of antique maps over the years, but found that that wasn't very satisfying because no matter what you collect, there's always more and more and more. And I realized that I had to find a focus. I was not interested in following the crowd, so I picked Holy Land maps. There's a very, very extensive collection at the University of Jerusalem. Otherwise, there are moderate to minimal collections in important libraries throughout the world and with some map collectors. Um, any library that has a Theatrum Orbis Terrarum Atlas will have these maps. Uh, Many times I've talked about these maps, but I've only presented them once before at Santa Clara University in Santa Clara, California, about 20 years ago, and that was well received. So this is the first time, however, that I'm presenting an extensive collection of Ortelius and his maps and the frontispieces to his two atlases. He had the Theatrum Orbis Terrarum and also a historical atlas called the Parergon. I'd like to give a few attributions first. One to Marcel van den Broeke, who lives in Holland and who introduced me to Ortelius and his maps over 30 years ago. And I have followed him very closely. And in my opinion, he's the world's most knowledgeable academic and map dealer on Ortelius and his creations. I'd also like to thank Tom Paper for creating the digital gallery and inviting me to do this on the gallery. My presentation was one of the first that has been recorded by him. I'd also like to thank my wife, Juliet, who has followed me throughout the world to various map dealers and libraries and has helped me many times in picking and choosing my maps. She also happens to be the editor of the California Map Journal, and I was a former president of the California Map Society. I'd also like to thank David Rumsey and Juliet Sweet Kind Singer of the Stanford University and the heads of the libraries and the Rumsey Map Library for scanning all 900 odd maps of mine of the Holy Land and its surroundings, and they can all be visualized free of charge on SearchWorks Stanford. We'll now turn to the actual Holy Land map collection. And the first picture I would like to talk about is Abraham Ortelius. He died in 1598. He is probably one of the world's most important cartographers. There are over 867,000 maps from his that he produced, and he was an extremely successful and revered cartographer, publisher, engraver, and colorist in Antwerp. As you can see, he's wearing an ermine cape, which suggests that he was extremely wealthy. He never married. He lived with his sister, who was a map colorist. The next picture is of the frontispiece of Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, his unique, first, highly acclaimed modern atlas of maps. This colored version is completely annotated as the significance of all the subjects in this frontispiece. The next picture is that of the frontispiece, uncolored, of the Parergon, Parergon indicating supplement. This atlas, created by Ortelius, contains his historical maps, and his historical maps of the Holy Land and surroundings were all drawn and engraved by him. The next picture is of the Holy Land. It stretches from Phoenicia down to the Nile Delta. It is oriented towards the north, with north on the top, and it is a unique map in that this became one of the keystone maps of the Holy Land in the 17th century. Notice the light gay pastels. This is typical of Antwerp coloring, and all of these maps were colored around or within 100 years of their production. This map has 7 states, depending on how many ships and how many monsters there are in the sea. The cartouches are very elaborate and ornate and are typical of Antwerp framing. We can move on to the next map, which is also a keystone map for 17th century Holy Land cartography, but this time east is turned to the north. And this map only goes as far as a peninsula jutting out from the eastern side of the Mediterranean called the Lycian Peninsula. This map is another interesting work of art because in the upper right-hand corner, there is 3 vignettes of the crucifixion, the birth, and the resurrection of Jesus. Then, if you move down to the lower left of the map, you now see in the opposing corner, diagonally, the story of Jonah and the whale, which is an extremely popular story both in Christian and Jewish Bibles and literature. Notice the intense hacher marks in the sea. This is typical of Ortelius. Much of this and the beautiful script writing is based on his association with his friend Gerhard Mercator. Move on to the next map and you will see again the Holy Land oriented towards the north, called Typus Choreographicus. And this is a map that shows Samaria, Judea, going from way up in the Galilee down to the level of the southern end of the Dead Sea. Notice that many of these pictures have the Dead Sea curved to the left or the right, and they're all incorrect. The Dead Sea usually goes straight down north-south or south-north, however orientation you like. This map is significant, but if you look in the lower left-hand corner in the Mediterranean Sea, there is a list of all the signs of the different major cities, minor cities, etc., in the Bible. This is the first time this kind of a index is put on a map. Notice the beautiful script. This is again probably the influence of Mercator. Also, notice that here instead of hacher marks, we have a bunch of dots which are used in the Mediterranean Sea. These are all different cartographic techniques that these people almost 500 years ago were able to think of and create. Our next presentation is that of the wanderings of Abraham. Now this is a different presentation. It's like a tapestry floating in the sky, although many of the original maps, the sky was colored yellow. It is unique in that it is surrounded by 22 medallions by Martin de Vos, who drew them, and they were then engraved by Ortelius's engravers, showing the life of Abraham. These medallions mark this as a keystone map, being the progenitor of Dutch decorative cartography. And though in those maps, later on in the 17th century, the surrounding vignettes were in the form of squares. There's another interesting thing about this map. If we move to the back to the Mediterranean Sea, move up to the top, we have an inset map of the actual route of Abraham, also used to fill space. to make the map more interesting. We can move on to the next map. This map, called Geographia Sacra, is a map of the holy places in Europe. It is a historical map, obviously, and it is unique in that if we move down to the bottom of the map and enlarge this small inset world, making this also a world map in my collection, you see that Ortelius has noted all the places where gold may have been obtained, either in Africa or South America and other places. We now can move on to the next map, which is that of the travels of St. Paul. As we know, he had, I believe, 4 trips through the Mediterranean up through Syria and present-day Turkey. This is all historical, but there's something unique in the top. These 2 medallions. There is no known author of these medallions, and it is suspected that Ortelius probably drew them and engraved them himself. In one picture, we have Paul landing on Malta, lighting a fire, throwing wood in the fire, being bitten by a snake with no harm obvious, and people thought that he must be divine, or in other words, an agent of God. And the other medallion, to the left, we have Paul entering Jerusalem. We can move on now to the next map. This is actually a city plan, and what this is a plan of El Escorial, built by Philip II. Philip II, who fancied himself the leader of the anti-Reformation, and also was the chief of the Inquisition, fancied building what he would call the New Jerusalem. And so El Escorial has a cathedral, it has a library, it has a monastery, it has all the features of a self-contained New Jerusalem in his mind. Again, we see that even though much of this is green, which is actually a favorite of German colorists, it is still in pastels pretty much, and is consistent with the coloring of the other maps. While this is not a map of the Holy Land, it's in Philip II's mind a map of the pseudo-Holy Land. We now can move on to 2 maps that are not by Ortelius, but by Francis Heraeus. Francis Heraeus was a little-known cartographer whose other great contribution was a globe, and he created 2 maps, one of the lands around the Eastern Mediterranean and the other around the lands of the Western Mediterranean, to put down the location of all the martyrs of the Christian Church. In this particular presentation, we again have another inset small world map, which he has inserted here. It gives me another world map for my collection. And finally, down on the bottom, to the right of the large map, is a map of the Holy Land inset here with now north on the top. Title of this is Lumen Historiarum. The next map is the map of the Western Mediterranean, again showing all the locations of the known martyrs of the Christian Church. Finally, on the bottom line, or the first map is, we're done here. Right, here is a map of the Turkish Empire. Now, this and the next 2 maps are not by Ortelius. This map is by Philip Gallet, the publisher and engraver of the portrait of Ortelius, which is the first picture in this series. Gallet was a very good friend of Ortelius. He actually lived on the same street across the street. And with Ortelius's permission, which we can surmise, there are no objections, Gallet produced a small version of the theatrum called an epitome, a small simplified version. Then we move on to the next map, even smaller, 2 by 3 inch map out of a smaller epitome produced by Gallet of this time very similar to the first Holy Land map which we saw. The type is Palestini Civi Todius. And again, this one was with the presumed permission of Ortelius. They were very good friends. Finally, we have something of significant interest, in my opinion, because it is by Peter Marchetti, a publisher and engraver in Brescia, Italy, and Venice, Italy, who pirated one of Gallet's epitomes, plagiarized everything in it, and produced it as his own atlas. Now, this pirating and plagiarizing was very common at this time because there were no copyright laws. And you will see this in various other antique map makers. And then there are others who have pirated their work and published it on their own. They made huge profits doing this because the paper was cheaper. They didn't have to pay anybody for writing, and the maps were simpler in design. I hope you all have enjoyed this presentation. I believe this is probably, as far as I know, the world's only presentation of this type of Ortelius and his Holy Land maps and other related religious maps. I hope you've enjoyed this, and if it's best followed by reading the annotations at the same time. All of the opinions and writing are my responsibility only for any mistakes therein. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Len. That's great. Thank you.